So I got this new MacBook. Remember I'd been talking about it because I was having issues with like this live stream situation.
Right.
That's not the reason I got it. But like I had an old one that had run its course, 9 years old. It was done. And so I had it for 23 days. It was it was a Sunday night. I was editing, almost done editing a podcast that was going to release the next morning. Mind you, it's 11:30 at night, and I release it at midnight every Monday morning.
Okay.
I had a glass of scotch on the other side. So I went to grab it and bring it over to me. It hit the top of the thing and spilled all over it. And so I just, all the scrambling things that I did.
Right.
Sure enough, it worked for about 15 minutes after, and then it just, like, the screen started to turn different colors, like, all the way up, and then it was dead. Just done. So I was just like, all right, I don't know. I just spent more money than I have on a laptop that kind of, like, I need for this kind of stuff, for the podcast. What am I going to do? So, like, I had no recourse. I didn't have Apple Care. But my brother, being the Apple genius, literal Apple genius that he is, he 4 days later came over without me knowing, brought me this big, well, giant for me, but a monitor. He closed the laptop and he figured out a way to use my laptop just as like the CPU. Right. So my laptop is currently working. It's been working for 3 weeks. And I just have this insane setup that I didn't have before. I just can't take my laptop anywhere. It just stays there plugged in.
Oh, man. I am so sorry.
So, it's okay. Thanks. But it's like one of those, the situation when you're just like, I mean, there's no wiggle room financially to be like, oh, well.
Yeah. Absolutely. Was it at least decent, Scott? Or actually, wait, no, that was even worse.
Good. It was Lagavulin.
So not only did you ruin your laptop, you also dumped a good glass of scotch.
It was all sorts of bad.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Tana, what was it? We bought Malcolm a laptop when he was like 12, and I think it was within 3 days that he dumped a glass of orange juice on it.
Oh.
No, I want to say it was soda.
Like it was like an orange soda.
I don't know which is
something very sticky.
Worse.
It had orange.
I don't.
Orange soda.
Yeah.
Oh, it's awful.
Yeah,
Oh, should I share this? Hold on.
I didn't respond well either, which didn't help.
I didn't respond well.
I did not.
Can you still see me on screen?
I can still see you on screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is my password?
I don't know. You didn't give it to me.
Can you tell? Come on, man.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
It's not whatever I'm typing in, that's for sure. Oh, there we go. I'm going to share this on Facebook to my millions of followers.
We'll repost it to our millions of followers.
Wait, did you not post it yet? Ancient?
Actually, I posted something this morning, and then I have a scheduled post to go out at 8 that says we're live now.
Oh, okay. Oh, sweet. I'll do it now.
Tano, Dave and I were wondering if you were going to have a burgundy sweatshirt. I was like, there is a chance she could have put on her Virginia Tech sweatshirt and then.
Oh man, that thing is in such tatters. Sorry, I'm breaking the color pattern. I have some red behind me though.
It's disappointing. Disappointing at best.
So, I spoke in New York over the weekend and I left one of my Cavs sweatshirts there. Yeah.
Was that intentional to like?
Yes, it's to slowly start to overthrow the Knicks fans.
in Rochester.
The Knickerbockers.
The worst name.
Yeah, I was like, good news. I have like 8 of those, eight Cavs hoodies. I'm good. I'll survive this.
So you kind of like the Cavs?
I do. Actually, they had a matinee game today, so I got to watch them play this afternoon.
Oh, nice.
I was wondering. I was like, is he rewatching something that already?
I wouldn't put that past me. I've rewatched.
I
Cavs
wouldn't
games.
either.
No, they had with today being MLK Day, the NBA has games starting at like 1 p.m. and then all day long.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the halftime show was excellent. There was a dance and live singers at the halftime show for the Cavs games. It was phenomenal.
Oops.
College too. Sparty almost won in college basketball, I'm assuming.
Who is this?
Fifth Sunday mentioned that
Sparty.
that there's a lot of Sparty, East Lansing, Michigan State. I can remember the city, but not the name of the school. No offense to Michigan State fans. Oh man,
The Sparties.
the worst thing about Toledo and taking trains is that whether you're leaving or arriving, it's not at a convenient hour.
No.
No, I took the train overnight. I got in at 6 this morning. I left Rochester at like 11:30 last night.
Awful.
Leaving was worse though.
Hey, thanks for being here, folks. Hope you've had a beautiful week, beautiful couple weeks, because it's been a while since we've been on. It feels like way too long. It's actually, I love how this has become such a part of my life that now I like miss it. I'm like, something is off about my week. It also is how I know what day of the week it is. Other than that, I have no idea what day of the week it is. It just, they all blur together. So welcome, folks. As usual, we have the brilliant Dave Capozzi. We have the also brilliant Dr. Don Schiewer. That was the enthusiasm. Is
You don't hear the crowd? The crowd's cheering.
we might need to back it down a little bit, folks. So tonight we have a couple things that we were kind of kicking around that we wanted to talk about, with it being MLK Day. We had a couple thoughts about having some discussions around race and around things that the church has done, contributed to, not contributed to, etc., and ways for us to be thinking about those things. So we'll be getting into that. Feel free to put any of the questions you have in the chat. Just put a Q and a colon before it. It's helpful for me to be able to find it amidst any conversations happening there. That being said, one other thing. Please just be kind and generous while you are having conversations in the chat. Want to make sure that it's a space in which people can feel safe to ask what they want. And with that matter, we also won't censor any of your questions unless your questions are definitely pointed towards harm or attempting to cause too much chaos. So that being said, Tana,
Yeah.
how was your week? I mean, you didn't have me.
Today?
You didn't have me around. Yes,
Well,
yes. Today, how was?
Well, I was just getting over being sick. And so that was kind of like a slow roll to kind of get back going, you know. But I rewatched the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Wow.
That sounds terrible.
The extended cuts of each movie.
That sounds. As someone who does not watch movies,
so
that
long.
sounds terrible.
Oh, and I also watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I really, really need to talk to somebody about it at some point because that movie was bonkers.
I haven't seen that yet either, but I plan on it. Unlike Don.
It is. It is so many things. It's fascinating.
Well, maybe we can do a movie review some Monday night.
Wow.
There's actually quite a bit to talk about in there. So
That's what I hear.
All right.
the trees walks more.
What about you, Dave? How was your week?
Yes,
Week's been it's been lovely. It's been full, lots going on, work, kids, all the things. Nice and busy. Yeah, nothing to complain about. Isn't it, on a side note, isn't it weird that that's typically how we respond to that question? How nothing to complain about? Why is that? Never mind. Don, how was your week in New York?
Nothing to complain about.
Hey!
Well, anyone that knows me knows I absolutely hate traveling. But this is the third or fourth time now I've gotten to speak in Rochester, and I'm trying to think. I've been there more times than I've spoken there, but so it's kind of nice because rarely speaking at different places do you kind of build relationships beyond maybe your contact there. But I have several friends there in Rochester now, and so played some board games and hung out. I went out a couple days early and got to do some other things. It was just wonderful. It was a great time. But like I was saying, if you weren't on while we still had the pregame happening, all trains to and from Toledo leave at terrible hours. Like to go there, I had to be at the train station by 3 a.m. And then was in Rochester by 10. Again, not a bad time-wise, especially since you're not driving. You can just sit and if you can sleep in that setting, it's wonderful. But I can't sleep in that setting.
Mm-hmm. Isn't that strange? Because Toledo, if I'm mistaken, correct me, but isn't Toledo the center of all entertainment in the United States right now? So why would they make it so hard to get there?
It is shocking that they've done that. I think what it is that Toledo is not able
better than New York.
There's not the infrastructure yet. This booming entertainment industry that recently came out. When did we start the stream? August. Yeah, this booming entertainment thing in Toledo starting in August.
Yeah,
the infrastructure just has not kept up with it. So
it's not.
This is a way to dissuade masses of people flooding the city.
That's good.
Our street in particular.
Yes. Yes. So, Dave, did you guys have school today?
No school today.
No school today.
It's a lovely thing. We just played in the snow all day.
Oh, you guys have snow?
That you can. Yeah, we sure do. Only a couple inches, not bad.
Fifth Sunday asks, I'm guessing this is somewhat to me, is it difficult to go to a church with a more traditional format than what you've grown accustomed to? It felt like kind of a flashback to watch it. It actually felt comforting. Like there was something about being in a space where there was a worship team, and there was some level of liturgy. I think the other thing is just the number of kids running around, and they even did like a children's teaching time and they read a children's book co-written by Amy Jill Levine, she's one of my favorite biblical scholars.
Yeah. You introduced me to her. That's awesome.
Yeah. Didn't Sarah talk about that? Doesn't Sarah read that book with her kids? Our podcast co-host.
I maybe. I don't remember.
I thought I remembered her talking about it.
She may have, but I don't.
But I understand that comfort of kind of the comfort of tradition. It's almost like a nostalgic kind of a thing. Because when we went out to visit my parents for Christmas, I actually thought about going to midnight mass at our old Catholic church, just because every once in a while, I just kind of feel like being in one of those opulent churches with the stained glass and all that,
Well, here's the thing with Artisan Church. That was the name of the church I was at. They just did some expansion and remodeling. And I think the thing that is really powerful about their space is that it is so thoughtful, right? Like I've been in a lot of more traditional style churches where the space is traditional. But like, for instance, they have a hallway that has 6 private bathrooms, individual bathrooms on it. So they don't have any shared use bathrooms. So they have 6 separate little like closet bathrooms
Nice.
in this hallway. All their signage is accessible. Everything about the place came from a place of design that of accessibility. It was really, really powerful to be in a space, feel the sacredness, whatever that might mean to someone, feel the sacredness of that space, and that space be bent towards absolute inclusion. It was really cool. It was very, very
That's
cool.
not surprising. It's not surprising to hear, because Scott and that community's leadership has always been very intentional and thoughtful about everything. Notably quieter than the others. Oh.
All right, Jezerik, you have to let me know if that fixes it or not.
I noticed that on some other streams too. Like, I can't tell when we're in the back end of it, but when it's watching it later.
Yeah, so for me, on my end, it sounds like I really basically hear the two of you and a little bit of me, so I can't really tell. So, Jezerik, if you could keep me posted.
Yeah, it's just goes to show Don's humility that he wants to be last.
Actually, it's really just a reflection of my personality of a quiet, timid personality that just sits in the corner. So that was to your question, Fifth Sunday. It was nostalgic. It was wonderful, but there was a newness about it too, because I don't know that I have been in very many churches where accessibility and inclusion was felt not by just signage, not just by artwork to demonstrate it, but even the way that the building was built. So, like, there's a ramp that goes up to the pulpit area, and so it wraps around the back and goes up to the pulpit area. So it's everything about it was wonderful, and the people there all reflect that mindset as well. So, all right, guys. So today is MLK Day. This is the day that white evangelical pastors co-opt 3 quotes from MLK, put them on their social media feed to look as though they are I don't know, what do you think they think they're doing?
Great question.
They're allies.
I don't know that they think that they're allies. I don't know what, because the quotes that are often used are almost quotes, because when I think about it, one of the main quotes is like, the conduct of a person's personality versus the color of their skin, or however that one goes.
Yeah.
Which is really just telling people of color. I don't know. It's icky. It's an icky time of year. I hate MLK Day for what I end up seeing coming out of white Christian social media feeds.
Yeah. Well, I think what's that, Tana?
And politicians.
Yeah. It feels more gross coming out of the church because, like, you expect exploitation of prophets and oppressed people from empires, but because we grew up with like a love and connection to the church, it always feels a little bit worse to me. Like, I expect it from politicians, but I think I've grown to expect it from the church as well. But there's so many unassuming and innocent, ignorant in the best sense of the word, folks. The "we have a black friend" thing. It's like you post the "I have a dream" speech because it makes you feel good, or I've chosen. The worst one to me is when a white person will post the one where he says like, hate is too big a burden to bear, so choose love. Something like that. That one. But like, the truth is, Martin Luther King has become a poster boy for the empire, whereas, the same thing happened to Jesus. So you can take this person that's no longer alive, who can't say, I would not have stood in support of what you're talking about, any of the things. But use them to like show, no, we're the good guys.
Yeah.
So I think there's something of that going on there.
Anything you want to add, Tana?
Yeah. It's interesting. I'm going to see if I can find this cartoon, but I saw a cartoon that was from MLK's time, and it was about him, and it was mocking his efforts, and like there were all kinds of public opinion polls that showed that most people felt like he was too radical, and he should just be quiet and blah blah blah. So it's interesting how we present it now as like, oh, this guy was this amazing leader and everybody knew it, and everybody was on board with it. And that's not how it actually was. And so I think what you were saying, Dave, about it feeling like icky coming out of the church, or Don, did you say it was icky? One of you said it was
We both
icky.
feel it.
Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why it feels worse coming from the church, for me anyway, is because one, he was a minister, and his efforts towards equality were very much grounded in his faith. And two, a lot of times when I hear white moderate people, white Christians, talk about equal rights, or like Black Lives Matter, or things like that, they use a lot of the same language that King critiqued clergy for using back then. I used to teach as a rhetorical analysis a letter from Birmingham jail. And a lot of times people isolate that. They just read the letter, but they don't read the statement from the Alabama clergyman that MLK was actually responding to. And what's fascinating to me about that statement is I feel like it could almost word for word be put out today by a lot of white moderate clergy. They're
Can you
like,
give us a sense of what that word is, or what that contains?
Yeah. So actually pulled it up to refresh myself. So they say, honest convictions in racial matters could properly be pursued in the courts, but we recognize the natural impatience of people who feel that their hopes are slow in being realized, but we are convinced that these demonstrations are unwise and untimely. They talk about outsiders coming into their community and stirring up trouble. They call for law and order and common sense. They use and they also mention that the peaceful protests, the nonviolent protests that King and others were engaging in, they actually say that those demonstrations invite violence. So they're sort of like blaming them for the violence. So victim blaming. And so it's very interesting because it's that same thing I hear now from people that are just like, it's not the right time, it's not the right method, and you are asking for it. So anyway,
no, the poll you talked about, I was just going to say real quick, the polls, I remember at one point seeing that in 1963, 50%, around 50% of the American population disapproved of him. And by the time of his death, it was a little over 75% that
Disapproved?
so it went up, disapproved. So it went up 25 points within those 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
75% of Americans disapproved of him. And then not long after, he became the face in many ways of this country.
Right.
The white version of him, of course.
Right, and like an anesthetizer.
Mhm.
I can't pronounce that word properly.
Yep, absolutely.
Watered down version. That's it.
For sure. Well, we were able to make Jesus look white, but you couldn't do that with Martin Luther King because he lived within our time. So they just had to take his words out of context and fit them.
So Fifth Sunday says here, the thing that disgusts me most is that the white culture pitted him against Malcolm X and the Black Panthers. And I don't really know much about how that may have been done, but it does bring in a question for me is I think that Malcolm X, I think it's interesting that we don't have a Malcolm X Day.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
That because I think Malcolm X was the wrong kind, quote unquote, the wrong kind of protest, the wrong kind of civil rights movement. And because of that, we still this day choose a figure that makes us being white, us feel the most comfortable.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
100%. But the FBI had files on both, so.
Yeah, of course.
Well, a key part is that Malcolm X was a Muslim. And in this Christian nation, there's just no way that was gonna. He was morally upright, man. That dude was like consistent as could be, straight as an arrow. And it's such a astute observation that we don't have that kind of celebration for him.
No, because he's not the person of color we want to celebrate.
No. Nope.
And that
we get to choose that very carefully.
And we have, and it's horrid, right? Like, so then let me ask this question: and what is the role? Because I believe there is one of the church. We established here, at least in our opinion, the role of the church is not the way that it typically goes on social media of posting your favorite MLK quote that makes you feel safe, secure, and wonderful as a white person. But what is the role, particularly, and actually, let's just assume that what we're talking about is white evangelicalism, white Protestantism, even white Catholicism. I just don't know enough about Catholicism to really speak to it. What is the role of the church when it comes to MLK Day? When it comes to and here's the thing that upsets me about everything, because you both know I feel this way about Christmas. It's like Jesus was born 2,000 years ago. Advent makes no sense to me. I'm not anticipating his birth. He's already been born. I feel the same way at Easter. I'm not like, oh wow, today he's risen. No, he was risen according to my understanding and faith for 2,000 years now. So like, why are we doing this one day thing every year? It gets weird.
Tana's face.
So that being said, I already feel it's kind of weird to package something into a single day of celebration or a single month for celebration. I understand the necessity of some of that, or at least the mind behind it. But what do you think is, if anything, the role that the church should be playing, or a more healthy way the church should be responding to this time of year every year?
Well, I'll say quickly that as someone who no longer participates in the church, I still have, unfortunately, I have opinions about this. I think that the church's role is to sort of lean into the discomfort of not actually, of being like, we didn't listen to him. Like, we didn't listen to the civil rights movement. He was constantly critiquing us.
Yes.
Constantly. So in what ways does that prophetic voice exist today? What does that look like now? And in what ways do we need to listen instead of preach? And maybe it's an opportunity, a time of year, time in the liturgical calendar, whatever people practice, to listen to voices that are prophetic here and now, that are talking about similar areas of justice that he was talking about in his day. Maybe that's a way to honor and celebrate his legacy.
So, Tana, what do you think as a rhetorician? What
I love
and
the
obviously not just as a rhetorician, because you're more than that, but what is the role that the church should be playing?
I'm going to bounce that question back to you because I want to hear what you have to say first.
So that way you can
About
correct my grammar.
Yeah. I want to have something to start with.
That's good. That's good.
Okay, so for me, you began to touch on how I feel about it, Dave, with this idea of that the church was critiqued, like the civil rights movement was a critique of Christendom, white Christendom in the U.S.
Yeah.
And I think we would be better served as maybe even using MLK Day, Black History Month, Latino History Month, right? Any of the Women's History Month, right? To confess and spend more of our time acknowledging that in this past year, the places in which we fell short for the dream that MLK had, and places that we could have done better, we should do better, we want to do better, awareness that maybe has, risen up over the years for us, or over that year specifically. I think about like Yom Kippur is a time when you reconcile with all of your neighbors and your brothers and sisters. You reconcile and then go before God for forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I feel like it should be more Yom Kippur, and less Hallmark quotables. I appreciate what Amanda said, amplify people of color's voices. I think that there is value there, and don't get me wrong, I'm not dismissing that piece. I think though that can also become performative, and I think I think that's a difficult balance, because like what we were saying, people would say, well, by putting quotes from MLK, I'm elevating people of color's voices.
Yeah.
Yes. Right. One of the things maybe during like any of the history months, if you're a pastor, that you only teach from scholars that are representative of that group, queer, Black, Hispanic, Latino, female, and that all of your resources, all the things that you're studying, all the things that you are using to look at scripture, faith, and the church, you only use representative voices for that, and make sure that you say it. So that's my thoughts off the top of my head.
That's good.
So now it's back to you, Tana. Ready? I'm kicking it back. Here it goes.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I follow a bunch of different, Black scholars and activists on various social media platforms, and the ones I follow on LinkedIn especially would always around this time of year say, well, Black History Month starts February 1st. So naturally, I have a lot of requests for speaking engagements or webinars at work or whatever. And so I'm just going to share something that several of these people I follow have said over and over, which is they tire of the performative things that coincide with the calendar celebrations.
Yeah.
And so I kind of struggle with the whole conversation of like, what should this day look like for us? Because everything feels wrong. Like nothing feels quite right. And one of the things, I can't remember which person said this, but last year around this time, they said, what would be better is if, you were focused on DEI and other things all year round. And so when these months come around, you don't actually really have to do anything special because it's already a part of who you are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that feels almost like the most honoring thing is instead of being like, well, we have a Monday in January and we have the month of February, which is also the shortest month, coincidentally. And that's when we'll talk about Black people, and done,
Yeah. That's good.
So then let me ask a question, which is one of the things I have found that is important or has been important to marginalized communities when I have spoken on topics. So actually, even in Rochester, the church I was speaking at is very much egalitarian, women in leadership, etc. But I spoke about how we've been taught to read the Bible through this patriarchal lens that we missed that the Bible was not always very patriarchal, right? That the Bible kind of elevates women in a lot of spaces because it doesn't have those gender roles and gender norms applied to it that we apply.
Yeah.
And I think in those moments, I think there's something meaningful, whether or not it was this week or not when I spoke, but I think there's something meaningful about seeing a male teach that about women in the Bible. And I also think that there's something very important about white people speaking out. And I think the difference is, and Tana, well, either of you, your feedback here is important. I think it's who your intended audience is. Like if you're posting an MLK quote to let the 3 or 4 tangential, maybe somewhat people of color that you may somewhat know that somehow you became friends with on social media through some accident, and you want them to know, hey, I know MLK. And I didn't totally just Google a quote from MLK. I pulled that out of my head. I think that if you're doing it for those reasons, it's gross and it's performative and it's harmful. Mm-hmm. I think that if you're posting things to other people in, like for me, if I was to post something as a pastor or as a public speaker, a leader, and I was challenging other non-people of color, other white people, if I was challenging white people to think more deeply or more importantly about race, I think that those are valuable moments. I think what the folks you were following, Tana, what they were saying, I absolutely believe it, because you bring them in, you bring in a person of color in to speak at your thing, and guess who's getting the credit for doing that? You, because you were so progressive that you thought to bring a Black person in during Black History Month.
Brilliant.
You know what is really fascinating to me? I am probably going to get this percentage wrong, but I was reading about diversity, equity, and inclusion jobs and things like that. And something like 80% of people who hold those jobs are white. And wow. I was like, I shouldn't have been shocked by that, but I was still shocked by that because all but one of the DEI experts I follow are people of color, and so it was just like, wow.
Dave, what's going on? Do you need us to call? Is there an emergency? Are you okay?
Dave? Uh-oh. What's going on?
He's so dramatic. We lost your audio though.
Oh, I got angry. I just threw my camera.
We weren't sure if you were having a medical emergency.
Sorry.
Anyway, yeah.
Sorry for the drama.
We'll let it slide this time.
He was that mad about those DEI statistics. He was like, throw my phone.
All right, so Dave, is it actually restrictive to have X History Month by subconsciously giving a pass to the other 11 months?
A friend of mine once had this great idea to do White History Month, and to like daily have one of like the atrocities that whiteness has caused. I was like,
I feel like that's good, but it will be way too quickly misunderstood and appropriated.
Yeah. Misappropriated. He agreed, but it was a great idea. I think we are moving with a new generation. I think we're moving past tokenization, which is and throwing bones, which is these history months, and into more of what Tana's been talking about.
I thought throwing both bones of you was playing dominoes.
Yes, you're right. Well, we're not going to play dominoes because that's appropriation too. So there's just like moving away from just, here you go, here's your month, because we're all collectively feeling this, like, what does this even mean? Right. Like what's the point of this? And it hurts the people. So like, I've worked in multiple contexts now where there are token Black folks, and in these times, their voices will be amplified. Phenomenal. That's great. And then dormant. And the white pastor gets to continue to speak the rest of the year. Yeah. I think that ultimately what is a good intention, as are most things that we try to do, to lift up the voices of people that have often been oppressed or silenced, it moves towards like you're cute. Like it's a cute, like it's a sweet, it's very condescending in a very unintentional way. And I think that the more we can talk about what does justice look like for 12 months. And actually, Don, I resonate very much with what you said about Jesus, his birth, his death. Sorry, Fifth Sunday. No, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not a gamer.
As long as you're standing them up and just pushing them over, you're fine.
Okay, so, but I resonate with what you were saying, Don, because I feel like the more that we isolate and lift up holidays, special days, it becomes our way of feeling good for a moment or getting rid of something for a moment, like Yom Kippur, and just for the rest of the time, just going about our business.
Yeah, we're getting our
in
fix.
A way that, fix. Yeah, it does feel like that. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but it's important to name, I think.
I wonder if that's sort of a natural life cycle of something like this. Whether it's a good life cycle or a bad life cycle, I'm not sure. But, at one point you go, man, all of our history books in schools just list white people's accomplishments. We need to make sure we're recognizing things. And so by designating a day or a week or a month or something, you're kind of like pushing people to do it. And then over time, maybe it gets, normalized to be part of regular discourse. And then maybe eventually that particular celebration isn't needed. I don't I don't know that we're at that point yet, because I still think there are people who, if left to their own devices, would only ever read white authors and
Yeah.
understand white accomplishments and, things like that. But I do wonder if that's sort of like, in a way, the goal. Like,
Yeah.
eventually this won't be necessary.
Well,
You know?
I can say that in the opportunities I've had to speak in different settings over the last several years, I don't have it's not as laborious for me to explain womanist theory
Mm.
as it used to be. Right? I remember when I first started reading
Yeah.
womanist theory, no one knew what it was. And there
Yeah.
were people fighting over feminism versus womanist, and why does there need to be a womanist? There's feminist theory and weird stuff, right? And now I can walk into a lot of spaces. Now, obviously, those are going to tend to be a little bit more progressive churches, but still, the fact that a white progressive doesn't mean that they're actually putting in the effort to do a lot of this. A lot of times, progressive, in my experience, has been they just reject a lot of the things that came from a more conservative setting, but they're not even participating in their own education or own learning and necessarily stretching themselves to something more. They just know what they're against, which is
Yeah.
basically somewhat how fundamentalism works, right? Fundamentalism knows what they're against, and so they position themselves against it. Those things. And I feel like a lot of progressive, which is why I don't really like the term progressive Christianity, because it's one of those pieces, right? But I do think that now, when I go into a space and I'm talking about queer theory, I'm talking about Black liberation theology, womanist theory, there is a sense. The number of times that I am surprised at how many congregants know the name Dr. James Cone in a
Yeah.
white space is I'm looking forward to not being surprised by it anymore. But Dr. James Cone is such an important figure in interpreting the Bible and understanding faith, and his name is becoming normalized in the white church, and I think it's fantastic. So I do think that there is movement, like you were saying, Tana, like that life cycle, and maybe that's also why it's starting to feel more and more icky, because initially you need to be reminded about it, and now we don't need to be reminded about it as much. But then I think the danger is stopping it too soon and it being forgotten again.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So it's a weird balance.
Well, that's a really interesting point, because it is. Whenever we praise Jesus for MLK, it is interesting because we often slap the labels good or bad on things, right? But this is not a conversation about good or bad. This is a conversation about effectiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
these things have lost their effectiveness in many ways. I think that's a really interesting point that you make, because whereas 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, this was necessary. I mean, I remember growing up in a mostly white suburb, all white really, and learning about Martin Luther King, and people saying, man, if I lived back then, I would never be one of those people that, was against racism. I mean, was against Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
Like racism was the worst thing. It was the worst thing to be called a racist. Now, white people seem to be very comfortable being against movements that are the children of the civil rights movement. And so it's an interesting evolution. So what's the most effective way? We talked about this with the Andrew Tate stuff. What's the most effective way to reach people, to have a conversation about justice in general, but justice when it comes to people of color in this country who continue to face a giant uphill battle towards really seeing what it means to have the same kind of access to equity that comes naturally to someone like me?
In his letter from Birmingham jail, MLK talks about how he almost finds the white moderate to be more of a problem and more of an obstacle than the Klan member.
Right.
To civil rights progress. And I just don't think the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Lauren Boeberts and the Matt Walshes are willing to engage in a what do you call that? Good faith conversation
Yeah.
about this type of topic and the language we use and everything. And those types of extremists, I feel like there was a period of time where they were like, oh, we don't listen. People were generally like, we don't listen to people like that, and those people are unhinged, and we're going to ignore that rhetoric. And we've somehow gotten to a point where we're like, well, that's a point of view that should be considered, and it's like
Yeah.
weird. And more people are like, yeah, I agree with that. I'm gonna, and so for me, I keep thinking about that whole white moderate thing. Like,
Yeah.
I was a white moderate. And over time, people talked with me, and I read things, and I listened to things, and I watched things, and I was moved. Um, and so there's a part of me that feels like the people we need to get at are the white moderates, and we need to have a conversation about what all of this actually means. Because, like I said earlier, a lot of the language hasn't changed. Like, oh, we have a call for law and order and common sense, and now we had the same thing. There were all the memes about, people be like, well, I'm all for equal rights, but Kaepernick shouldn't be kneeling at football games, and BLM shouldn't be doing protests and blah blah blah. And then there were the memes that were like, yes, I'm all for equal rights conversations, not like that, and not like that, and not like that, and
Yeah. Right.
and that's exactly what those ministers were saying. And so it feels like we need to be able to enter into conversation with the people who are kind of becoming or have been an obstacle because they're not willing to call out the Matt Walshes and the Marjorie Taylor Greens and, you know, all those other people.
Yeah.
Like, because they're not actually wearing a Klan hood, you know?
It's interesting that
Yeah.
there's so much fear of like the subcategory groups from a lot of like the more right leaning religious folks of like BLM, Antifa, but everyone's cool with Proud Boys. Like it's like I've never met someone that has a card, a membership to Antifa. I've never met someone that has a membership to BLM. But they literally have membership cards for like the Proud Boys.
Right. I mean, don't get me started on that.
So real quick, Amanda asked a question that I want to make sure we don't miss and we get a chance to answer. So what's the difference between feminist theory and womanist theory? So one of the great explanations for this I read probably a decade ago was a womanist theory, a person, an expert in womanist theory, said feminism is just the spouse of the plantation owner upset that she doesn't have as much ownership of the plantation.
Wow.
Yeah.
Ooh.
And so Amanda, the womanist theory comes from the experience of Black women and their experience. A lot of Black households and culture is matriarchal. So the problems that women of color face is very different than what white women face, right? And again, I think it was the same person said, feminism is the white woman sitting in her big SUV in her driveway in her gated community, upset that someone just called her sweetheart.
Right.
And I'm not saying that's right, wrong, and different. I'm just saying that there's some significant differences, and I think we saw it the most with the Women's March on DC, when we had all of these white women show up with their pink pussy hats on.
Yeah.
And all the women, the black women and women of color just in general, were like, we've been marching for years, and you just showed up and acted like you have sacrificed so much to be here. So womanist theory and feminist theory definitely overlap, but there's also a significant difference in how the lens and what the impact of that lens has on the different theories. Tana, you may be able to speak to this better than I, because you have done way more study in genre and theory and stuff than I have, but obviously, so I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
No, I would just add that feminism has a long history of leaving out women of color, and so yeah.
I mean, all we have to do is even look at the right to vote. How long was it after white women received the right to vote that women
Decades.
of color were able to actually serve?
Yeah, and women of color helped in the fight, and then white women were like, wait, it's not the right time.
Yeah. So
always
unfortunately, that means that between feminist theory and womanist theory, there's a lot of conflict, obviously.
Yeah.
I think that's something. I think that's something to note. That and we experienced this in the can we name our denomination, Don?
Yep. Do it. Call them out.
The Evangelical Covenant. When I was ordained, and they would do this thing where they would pit the marginalized groups against each other. So like, if you were a white guy that supported LGBTQ plus inclusion, then like that was your group. But like for me, like I felt like the anti-racism stuff was not more important, but like it had been a longer fight, and the LGBTQ plus had like hurdled over it.
Yes.
And became a majority white movement within our denomination. And the denominational leaders were thrilled for that to be the case, because what whiteness does best is it pits marginalized groups against each other.
Absolutely.
And when we've got women who are marginalized by a patriarchal system, whether they're white or women of color, this is the result, where like they're fighting for their rights as they know how to. You fight for your self-interest. This is what they teach you in community organizing all the time. You have to know your self-interest. What are my self-interests? And as a white woman, you're fighting for your rights as a white woman. That's all you know. And then as women of color come along and have more rights and have more of a voice, they're getting media coverage more, then womanist theology takes off, right? And so then these both marginalized groups within American patriarchal society clash, because of course they do. Yeah. Because what whiteness tells you is there's only enough for some of you. There's only enough for some of us. There's not enough for everyone to go around. And so we've got this situation that is the truth, that these groups like really do fight against each other in ways that gets a little bit confusing and difficult to navigate. Well, someone like myself is able to sit back and be like, nice work, everyone. Yeah. Let me know when you catch up to me. It's interesting and difficult, and requires a lot of listening in order to like more faithfully understand what's going on and who it is that we really need to set our sights on.
Dave, you touched on something that I've been really thinking about lately, which is I think a lot of white women are so caught up in their self-interest that they can't necessarily see how a Black woman's experience is different and worse.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I unfortunately experienced that when I was going through all kinds of different layers of understanding over time, right? And there was a time in like 2014 when, before the popularization of the Me Too movement, there was the hashtag Yes All Women that was really
Yeah.
popular on Twitter.
Yeah.
And reading all that stuff, I finally was like, I remember reading some of the stories and being like, man, I'm so glad that didn't happen to, oh, and like
Right.
having this moment where a lot of studying I had been doing in feminist theory and just people I was talking to and all this different stuff I was doing was kind of unraveling a lot of the patriarchy in my life. And then I had this moment where I was pissed, right? I was like, wait a minute, all this really bad stuff happened to me,
Mm.
and um everybody blamed me for it. Like I was told it was
Yeah.
my fault. And so I was really mad. And then this was like right before Ferguson.
Mm.
And Ferguson happened, and uh we were beginning to study more about racial justice at our church, and we were participating in protests and doing all this stuff. And then and I started following all kinds of different activists and everything, and a lot of the Black women were like saying this about feminism and that about feminism, and like pointing out that white women weren't doing enough. And I remember actually being angry because I was like, I didn't even get a couple months for this. I didn't even get a
Yeah.
couple months to mourn my own experience before I have to be told that I have to be more sensitive to other people. Like it was like this, it was this
Yeah.
very selfish reaction, but it was born out of pain,
Yes.
you
That
know?
makes so much
And
sense. That,
and so I think I'm just assuming that I'm not the only person who has experienced that. And so I think as there are women who over time are like, oh, wait, that's some patriarchal bullshit, and that's some patriarchal bullshit, and that's some patriarchal bullshit. Oh, crap, I'm not supposed to say that on YouTube. Uh, like, then you come up at them and you're like, oh, but other people have had it worse, and also some of the stuff you're doing is oppressing other people.
mm.
I don't think their brains can like compute that. It's like I'm oppressed, but I'm also an oppressor.
Yes.
Ugh.
And
Ugh.
that's a difficult thing to think about and be critically.
To be human, yes, difficult because and
Right.
right, because I think about this too as like a we all, to be human is to experience trauma. It's just the way that it is. Every one of all three of us have experienced trauma. Don and I are not exempt from it because we're white men, you know, um, and so the question becomes: are we able to sit in those moments, have our
Mhm.
feelings, let them be what they are,
Mhm.
um, and then also be able to shift and then listen when someone else is sharing. It's like any conversation; it just happens sometimes from a screen or
Yeah.
nationally.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that took practice for me. Like
yeah,
I had to practice that.
mm.
And I don't know that many people are that willing to do that kind of work.
No, I think
Um,
that's really what a lot of this comes down to, is
yeah.
that
Yeah,
acknowledging racism in your own life, acknowledging racism in the systems that have benefited you, acknowledging
yeah,
racism in your faith community. Uh,
Hmm.
those are complicated moments to
Yeah.
deal with,
yeah,
the grief, the shame, uh, the maybe embarrassment, disappointment, all of those things. And for many of us, that's where we stop. And partially
Yeah.
because we have never been taught how to actually process it and do anything meaningful with it, because we've never been confronted with a lot of this stuff. And so I think kind of what you were saying a little bit earlier, Dave, I think this next generation coming up has watched their parents be confronted with some stuff that the parents are acknowledging, at least some, a lot of white parents are acknowledging their contribution, the privilege that they had gotten. And now the children are growing up with that as being a natural part of their story. And so they're going to be more capable of asking questions, good questions about those things. And they're going to be good at wrestling with them. Whereas for us, it took so much energy just to accept that it's true. And too many of us stopped at the acceptance that it was true and didn't continue to put in the work and the effort to say, okay, well, now that it's true, how do I bring about change? Which is already daunting in itself. Like, I mean, even if we're not talking about race, we're just talking about change your eating habits and go.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how many of us just change our, like, it's why New Year's sucks, right? Like, all of us gave a list of things we're going to change this year, and we're all going to fail before February. Because change is so hard. Even if you acknowledge and you see the thing that is harmful to you, the thing that is harmful to others, and you acknowledge that, the next step is even harder, which is
it's really good. It's really good.
Yeah.
That's a great note for me to leave on.
It is.
I hate to leave you Sheevers and chat, but that's a lot to think about right there. But love you all. Happy MLK night.
Thank you.
We'll see you next week.
All right.
Sorry about the concern about my well-being over here, but all is well.
Well, you'll survive. It'll be fine.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
All right. See you, Dave.
Bye.
All right. Hold on one second. There we go.
I'm Dave.
You oh shoot, you are Dave. Stop being Dave. I don't know how to get rid of that. We're gonna wrap up anyhow and say goodbye to folks. So anything you kind of what's that?
I had a thing I wanted to say.
Well, do it. Say it.
Okay. All right. One of the things that I think is an obstacle to these conversations, going back to what I was saying about like talking to white moderates and all this stuff, is the veneer of being reasonable. One of the reasons why a lot of racism and other things becomes kind of more acceptable is because there are people who do not say things like these more extreme voices. They say them, using what sounds like logic and reason and when you say something and you're not yelling at someone, it's that much easier to swallow. So I think that is one of the things that's one of the hurdles to overcome in these conversations as well, because to say, oh, we want law and order and common sense sounds reasonable to the average ear.
Right.
And so I think when somebody comes along with a conversation like that and they're like, oh, no, I'm not against equal rights. I don't agree with the way they're going about it, or I just think the timing is wrong.
Right.
It sounds like, oh, that's somebody who's in the middle, and so therefore they are more logical and reasonable and unbiased.
Yeah, I think you have that language, both like the reasonable language, but then also what is the term that's often used about types of conversation that we need to have a um, instead of a confrontational discussion, we need to have a
Don't know what happened. Sorry.
that we have to have a oh my goodness, basically saying the conversation has to be calm.
Right. Civil discourse.
Civil discourse. Thank you. Yeah. So we'll also use that language also in order to kind of create a space in which it gets controlled. The narrative is controlled. So
Yeah, there was a book I read.
liar.
I don't remember if this is the
Oh, that's interesting, Tana.
what?
Amanda's comment.
That's how dudes often guess. Yes. Yes. Oh, I'm just being reasonable, logical. Why are you getting so emotional?
Yep.
I'm
Absolutely.
Just, you know,
Yep. Amanda, unfortunately, that is spot on.
Karen Tracy. Yep, this is it. This is it. Okay, so there was this book I read called The Challenges of Ordinary Democracy, and it was a case study actually of a particularly contentious school district before all school districts became contentious. Yes, devil's advocate. And this woman came to the conclusion that this researcher came to the conclusion that the people in charge were not giving voice to like somebody that was like oppressed. And she actually called on talked about MLK with this and said that when a voice isn't being heard and people are doing things to oppress voices, then there may come the time for reasonable hostility.
Ah, yes. What's what I had said to David Gushee about pacifism versus, physical altercation, that in any situation, the greater your power and privilege in that situation, the more passive you should be behaving.
Yeah.
And the less that should be an obligation to someone who has less power and privilege in a situation, that same thing should not be put on them.
Absolutely. And
like someone being actively harmed should be able to fight back.
Right.
Physically.
Yeah. And that's why I really dislike, voices like Matt Walsh. He's a privileged white guy and he's yelling about stuff while actively, oppressing and calling for violence in some cases against oppressed populations.
Right.
And he's loud about it and he's angry, and that's not appropriate for many reasons. But people will tone police, people of color and other oppressed populations, and be like, well, you shouldn't be talking like XYZ. And it's like, well, what is it? The riot is the language of the voice of the unheard, or of the unheard, right, or something like that.
There's an MLK quote that people aren't going to use often.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Tana, is there anything else before we wrap up? I mean, I feel like there's so much more, but anything else that you want to share this evening?
I can't think of any more wonderful things to unpack. I would just say that I hope that we have a conversation at some point about how to actually do this.
Absolutely.
Because definitely. I think that's, in a way, some of what we're trying to do here with Ancient Jesus Future Faith is we're trying to give people the tools to at least unpack things so they stop attaching God's name to oppression and racism. and sexism. And because that's the other thing is, as soon as you kind of put God behind it, I feel like it gives people all sorts of excuses to, justify what they're doing. Um, and I think that's part of what we're trying to do is give people language for that, and also invite them to interrogate their already held beliefs. I just wish I could think of other ways, especially for people who like aren't interested in engaging in religious conversation, to start to have those conversations of like stepping back
Right.
and being willing to give up, what is it you say, give up a little bit of their freedom so others may have more.
Yes, true freedom is giving up some of your own freedom in order that others may have more.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think as far as my skill set in all of that would be is if anyone, any of the listeners or viewers, had passages in the text that they have been heard used in order to justify racist behavior or attacks on marginalized communities, those are where I can really help people maybe think about things differently from a
Yeah.
theological perspective. Otherwise,
Yeah.
what we're really left to do is debate philosophical things, which is fine with me, but it's giving the tools to speak against that or oppose those things are much different in a philosophical setting than what they might be in how do I confront poor interpretation of the text that gives me permission to behave this way. And those are absolutely areas that we can and will address on this channel. So, all right. Well,
Cool.
with that, I appreciate all the people that hung out with us tonight. Great questions and comments in the chat. Really appreciate it. These are hard conversations and ones that we need to be having a lot of. And I'm sure we're going to have some more of them throughout Black History Month. And I hope we do it again throughout LGBTQ month and Women's Month and Latinx month, etc. So these are conversations we need to continue to be having, especially as white people of faith. That we need to be thinking about how are we contributing to harm or contributing to liberation. And I want to be a person that contributes to liberation. So
Yeah.
I hope you all have a beautiful night, and we will see you Thursday night. Dr. Dwayne, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank on his last name. Wood. Dr. Dwayne Wood is going to be on, and we're going to have some conversations around how religious trauma, and any trauma for that matter, impacts the well-being and the health of the body. I think it's going to be a wonderful conversation. I hope you stop by and join us. So Thursday night at 8, I would look forward to that conversation. So thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.